Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this tutorial is all about my most commonly asked question, so I thought it's time to do a tutorial on it. How to multiply your cake batter for larger tins. So during this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to fill different size tins, how to multiply your mix, baking temperatures, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about multiplying your buttercream recipe at the end too. What I've got in front of me is my regular 6-inch tins, which I usually bake my cakes in. I think it's a great size. It feeds between 15 and 20 people because the cakes are quite tall. But I've also got a couple of 8-inch tins, and I've also got these small 4-inch tins. Now these three sizes are probably my most popular sizes to make. Whether I'm making them as individual tiers or stacking them, it's still a 3-tier cake, but it's not too big, so it's suitable for parties and larger celebrations without having a crazy tall cake. So what I've also prepared is some of my cake batter. So what I've got here is 2 double batches of my regular 6-inch cake recipe. So for those who use my cake recipe or have seen it, you'll know that my 6-inch cake recipe involves 250 grams of butter, 250 grams of sugar, 250 grams of self-raising flour or plain flour with added baking powder, and 200 grams of eggs, which is the equivalent of 4 eggs. So let's start off with my regular 6-inch size. So I always bake my cakes in 2 tins and then cut each cake in half to get a total of 4 layers. And usually in each tin, I weigh out about 470 grams of batter into each to ensure they're both even. So that's one cake, same again. And there you go, you have 2 evenly filled 6-inch tins. Now, let's focus on the smaller size. So this is now a 4-inch cake, and I've got 2 4-inch tins here. And I forgot to say this before, but it's obvious. They're both greased and lined with paper, so the cake doesn't stick. Now, because 4-inch is 2 inches less than the 6-inch, we're actually going to half the recipe. So it's the same exact recipe, but when you're making multiple tiers at a time, you can actually make all the batter, and then you just need to know how much you weigh into each tin. And don't worry, I've written all the quantities of how much to weigh in each tin in the description box below. So 4-inch tins need half the batter of a 6-inch tin. So I'm going to weigh roughly 235 grams into each of these tins, because that is 475 in half, roughly. And once again, 2 evenly lined cake tins. And when you put the 4-inch tin next to the 6-inch tin, you can tell already that the cake batter has actually come to pretty much the same height, which means that these are going to be really consistent once baked as well. So once again, just to recap, 4-inch tins require half the amount of the 6-inch tins. So I'm just going to leave these to the side now and focus on the 8-inch tins. So 8 inches is 2 inches larger than the 6-inch cake. So what it needs is doubling the recipe of the 6-inch. So for the 4-inch, we halved it. For the 8-inch, we're doubling it, which means there was 475 grams in each of the 6-inch tins. So there's going to be double in each of the 8-inch tins, which is 950 grams. This is really when cake maths comes into play. Now, a little trick that I have to weigh into larger tins, where it may not necessarily fit on the scale because it can cover the numbers, get a smaller tin, place that on first, and then put the larger tin on top. Now, it may seem a bit scary, but it's absolutely fine and secure. Just make sure that it's pretty centered, and you can go ahead and weigh your cake batter. So in this mixer bowl, I have exactly double the 6-inch recipe, which is 500 of everything. So hopefully this batter will fill these 2 tins exactly. That's 1. And of course, don't forget to set your scale each time to 0. So you're taking into consideration the weight of the tin as well. There we go. The 6-inch tin is still safe. And then we have our 2 evenly measured 8-inch cakes. So again, to recap, this was double the amount of the 6-inch recipe, which means there was 500 grams of butter, 500 grams of sugar, 500 grams of flour, and 8 eggs, which is the equivalent of 400 grams of eggs. And when you put them all together, you can really see how even out the cakes are. So basically what you do is every 2 inches bigger, you add another recipe to it. So for example, let's call the 6-inch recipe my batch recipe. So the 4-inch is half of one batch, the 8-inch is 2 times one batch. So if you then go up to a 10-inch, which is obviously even larger, this is 3 times the batch. So 3 times the amount that goes into a 6-inch recipe, i.e. for me, it's 750 butter, 750 sugar, etc. Then when you go even bigger to a 12-inch cake, this is a serious size cake, it's 4 times the batch. So it's 1,000 grams or a kilo of butter, sugar, flour, etc. So this is my really easy way of multiplying my cake recipe. And like I said, whatever cake recipe you use, just count it as your batch number 1 and multiply it like that further. There is something that I did want to say though, is that cake recipes in general can be played around with, and nowadays cakes are getting taller and taller. So if you wanted to add more into a tin, that's also fine. However, there is a limit. So something that I've started to do recently is putting more in my 6-inch tin. Not as much as goes in my 8-inch tin, because then the tin is too full and the cake won't bake properly. But I've been multiplying my 6-inch recipe by 1.5. So rather than 250 grams of everything, it's 375 grams of everything with 6 eggs, which is also 300 grams of eggs. And therefore can put a little bit more in these tins. So I still have some leftover batter, so I'm going to show you the difference and the maximum you should fill a tin as well. So what I'm going to do is add half of a 6-inch recipe, half of a 6-inch recipe, because the 6-inch recipe is divided into 2 tins. So basically, I'm going to add the same amount that goes into a 4-inch tin on top of what's already in here. So I'm going to add another 230 grams. So in total, there would be 700 grams of batter in this tin. Yes, just had enough. So once again, it's the same size cake, but now this tin has significantly more batter than the original 6-inch tin does. Now, like I said, there is a maximum to fill your tins. I would never overfill a tin, which means go past the 2/3 mark. I wouldn't fill the tin to the top because obviously the cake rises and you don't want an overspill. And something to be aware of is that if you don't have enough batter in a tin, it can be very thin and it will burn. So I would say anywhere between these 2 sizes. And of course it helps having taller tins as well. So even though it's the same cake recipe and it's all at the same height, apart from the 6-inch that I've done slightly taller, cake timings will differ over the tins. So my 6-inch cake usually takes between 45 to 50 minutes in the oven. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, depending on your oven. If you've watched my cake videos, you'll know all about it and how to trust your own oven. The 4-inch cakes are smaller cakes. Because the tin is smaller, there's more metal that gets hotter and therefore it's a lot quicker and it's closer together because it's a smaller size. Whereas the 8-inch cake, the cake in the middle will take longer to get hot because the metal is further away from it. So the 4-inch cakes usually take between 30 and 35 minutes. What I like to do is set a timer for 30 minutes and then check every 5 minutes after that until they're cooked through. I've mentioned the regular 6-inch, but the taller 6-inch takes more like 55 to 60 minutes to really cook through. Once again, if you overfill your tin, it will take so long for the cake to actually cook as well that the outside will burn before the inside's cooked, which is another reason why you shouldn't put too much cake batter in a cake tin and divide it between several or 2 tins. The 8-inch cake also needs the same time as the taller 6-inch cake. So we're talking between 55 to 60 minutes. As I said before, I like to put a timer on for about 50 or 55 minutes and then check every 5 to 10 minutes. You really need to trust your baker's instinct, so if you can still see there's quite a wobble after 50 minutes, then set the timer for another 15 minutes. If it's nearly done, then maybe it only needs another 5 minutes. So obviously something to pay attention to if you're multiplying your cake recipe is your baking times. Now for larger sizes, like these 2 here, obviously require a lot longer in the oven. And something that I've realized is actually turning the oven down about 5 degrees, especially for the larger cakes, really helps prevent them from burning. Because like I said, if a 12-inch takes about 70 to 75 minutes to bake, that outside layer will cook a lot faster than the inside does. There are things like baking strips, which I'm also asked many times about, and I'll be honest, I've never used them. I've never needed to. I've only ever burnt a cake if I've kept it on 180 degrees the whole time. But usually I now bake my cakes between 170 and 175 degrees Celsius. So this is how you multiply your cake recipe. Just remember what your batch is and then go from there, whether you need to times it by 2 or 3 for larger tins or divide it in half. And if you have to start using half an egg, I know that sounds really strange, but go by the measurement of the egg instead. For example, I do 200 grams is 4 eggs. So if I needed to do half an egg, I can weigh out 200 and let's say 30 grams of eggs. So whatever recipe you're using, there is always a way to half it, even if it does involve using half an egg. So I've covered pretty much everything you need to know about multiplying your cake batter for larger tins. Now let's talk about the buttercream, because obviously baking the cake is only half the job. And I get asked this question a lot regarding my buttercream, especially Swiss meringue buttercream. So there's something really important to note, is that the size of your mixer will determine how much buttercream you can make at one time. For a standard size mixer like this one, with a bowl this size, can only fit up to 250 grams of egg whites, 500 grams of sugar, and 500 grams of butter. So if you're watching this and have no idea what I'm talking about, this is my Swiss meringue buttercream recipe, and you can find a detailed tutorial of this on my channel, but I'm just going over the quantities. So, like I said, that is the maximum amount for this size bowl. Any more won't incorporate the air enough, and it won't turn into buttercream. It may if you add a few more grams of each ingredient, but I prefer to play it safe. So what I like to do, if I'm just working with a small mixer, is to make the maximum amount, which is the amount that I've just said, and do all the crumb coats, and then make another batch and use that for the outside coating. Because at least one is like a crummy buttercream, and then the other is the cleaner buttercream that goes on the outside of the cake. Unless you have a larger mixer, such as this one here. So this is a heavy-duty KitchenAid. This is actually my first KitchenAid that I bought myself when I went full-time with George's Cakes. So it's been with me for quite a few years and still works amazingly well. And I believe it is the 6.9 litre. Now in this size mixer, I can make double of what I can in this mixer. So, side note, if you are interested in making cakes, and lots of cakes at one time, I would definitely invest in a bigger mixer because it just saves you so much time and hassle. And that's just me putting it out there. I haven't been paid to say that or anything. It's a genuine piece of advice. So in the large mixer, I would put 500 grams of egg white, a kilo of sugar, and a kilo of butter, but no more. That is really reaching the limit on that. Sometimes I play it safer and do 400 grams of egg white and double that of sugar and butter, so 800 grams of each. But that is really the maximum for that size. Of course, if you have even bigger mixers, then firstly, lucky you, but you can also adjust how much goes into those mixers. Now, how much does one need for a larger cake? So essentially, it really depends on the cake you're making, and I know that doesn't sound so helpful at first, but also people use different amounts of buttercream. So for example, I've been finding that people who are just starting with cake decorating usually put on a lot more than they need on the crumb coat stage. And once the buttercream has all crumbs in, you can't then use it for the outside coating and therefore use up a lot more buttercream. So for a 6-inch cake, I would say start anywhere between 200 grams of egg white to 250 grams of egg white, and then use the double amount of sugar and butter to whatever egg white amount you're using. So for a standard size 6-inch cake, I would usually use the 200-400 amount. But if you want some extra piping details, or even if you're doing piped flowers or something and you want to make a bit extra buttercream, then go for the 200 and 500 amount. So if you're decorating and stacking and filling an 8-inch cake, then I would advise making the 250 and 500 gram amount. Use as much as you need for the crumb coat, and then you'll probably need to make a little bit more, especially if you're using the small mixer. But the beauty of Swiss meringue buttercream is that you don't have to make 200, 400, 400 each time. it works with 75 grams egg white and 150 sugar and 150 butter. So you really need to play around with what cake design you're doing, because obviously a naked cake doesn't need as much as a very pipes detailed one does. But if you are going for larger cakes, then make a larger batch of buttercream, of course, beforehand, and use that for the crumb coat. Following on from that, something that I found really helpful, especially when doing something like a wedding cake, or if you've got lots of cake orders to get through, is one day do all the crumb coat and leave the crumb coated cakes in the fridge overnight. And then the next day, make your new batch of buttercream. You don't need to even add flavor to it because it's just for the outside. And then you're kind of working in a more cleaner environment. So that's a really helpful trick. Once again, you don't need to remember anything off by heart. I've written all the quantities for how much batter goes in a tin, how much each tin weighs, and the amounts of buttercream used for multiple sizes as well in the description box. If you haven't already, then I advise you to check out my videos on Swiss meringue buttercream and how to make a simple sponge cake, because I think you'll find that really helpful if you haven't watched those already. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I apologize for talking a lot, but these things really need explaining. And if there's anything you would like me to explain or show in the next coming tutorials, then let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and informative, and we'll see you very soon.